Forgot to do the countdown, but we are live.
Awesome.
So, welcome to Alley Talk once again. I'm Alec Costival, your host. My co-host right to the virtual right of me is Kyle Fisher. Both of us being members of Philly Sports Network / the Metro Philly. Phillies writers, part of the team. Spring training. The first game starts tomorrow. And we're here to talk about it, preview everything we have to go over.
Who would have thought? I feel like it came on so fast. You know, all of Philadelphia was wrapped up in the Eagles' playoff and eventual Super Bowl victory. To now have to pivot to the beginning of a long season of Phillies baseball. It kind of feel like it snuck up on us, but that's just because of how well the other teams in the city have been doing, except for the Sixers. Not talking about the Sixers, but everybody else has shown some bright moments, had some things to talk about, obviously punctuated with that Super Bowl victory last week. So people may still be living in that celebratory aura of the Super Bowl championship brought back to the city. But for us as media members, it's time to pivot right to baseball.
And I think people are allowed to bask in the glory of a Super Bowl win. That does not happen often. We've been absolutely inundated with good luck, especially getting to 3 Super Bowls in the last 7 years. That's unheard of for the Eagles, and it's great. And people should take that excitement and continue it on to the Phillies because they have a great, exciting team. Of course, they didn't make any big, sexy move over the offseason. But why shouldn't you be excited about this team that won 95 games a year ago and won their division? Granted, the Mets are better and the Braves are better, but the competition could make the Phillies better.
And I don't know. The Braves are better than they were. The Mets are better than they were last year on paper, but they still have a lot of question marks despite signing the biggest free agent besides Shohei in the last decade. Excuse me. But like you said, the competition, this seems like a group that is fueled by competition, right? They went on that Miracle World Series run, and the first thing they said was, well, now we want to win the division, right? We don't want to be the upstart guys. We want to be the guys that people are chasing. And they eventually accomplished that last year, then losing in the first round that they played in the playoffs, especially losing to a division rival. I think that's going to really energize this squad. I think you're going to see a lot of early excitement from the team themselves. Now, I will remind fans that it is a long season. So if they come out to a slow start, just like they did in 2022, maybe give them the benefit of the doubt that this is a very talented club. You mentioned that they didn't spend a lot in the offseason. One thing that Dombrowski has said when asked about just this, fans want everybody to go spend as much as they can on anyone, especially considering there's no salary cap. But he reminded us, and I like to remind folks too, that the Zach Wheeler extension kicks in this year. That was a significant increase in pay. Worth it because Zach is one of the top 3 pitchers in all of baseball, but you did spend money on him. You do have money in other areas that are increasing this year. Your guys who went through arbitration hearings all saw an increase. So while it may not have been a new name, their spending has been done. And now it's time to see with this top tier talent and stars at multiple positions, if they can finally get over the hump. And that is a pretty large hump across the country in the LA Dodgers.
Well, they also filled a major hole while trading for a new starter in Jesus Luzardo.
Oh, yeah.
The 5-starter hole and the 4-starter hole because of Ranger Suarez's injuries late last season, that's been very well patched. Plus, you have Andrew Painter waiting in the wings, coming in probably the start of summer, end of June, start of July. This Phillies rotation feels like they can carry them to anywhere they really need to go, especially in the regular season, because it is starting pitching depth that really propels teams to build up those win counts. Now, if the Phillies don't have to worry about every 5th day, and in the second half of the season, every 4th and 5th day, they could really be on to something here. But as you said, the Mets don't scare me. And, Juan Soto, they've obviously improved the offense, but their starting pitching is questionable.
Leaves something to be desired, that's for sure.
That, and I believe Frankie Montas just got injured. So they're down an arm
Yes, he
already.
did. Can
And
I
now,
interest you in a Taijuan Walker New York Mets? Can I?
I heard the Marlins need to spend significant amount of money.
But not to discount Taijuan Walker. We know how rough of a season that was last year, and being down at the ballpark, having the opportunity to speak to the guy he really feels last season. That you don't have a guy like, and I don't want to badmouth the guy because I've never spoken to him personally. I don't know him. I don't know any Angels reporters who have interacted with him closely, but the messaging on Anthony Rendon is that he kind of like doesn't care, right? He's hurt, doesn't really care that he doesn't bring anything. He's happy to sit at home, collect all of his stuff. Like, obviously he wants to be on the field on some level because you're not doing this unless you want to, but when he struggles to stay on the field, the storyline has been, oh, this guy just doesn't care enough. Taijuan Walker is a guy that cares. He cares about what his result on the field is. It just wasn't there last season. If he can return anything close to what he gave you 2 years ago, and maybe not the win counts, but if his ERA is close to that, if he can be the spot starter, the guy who allows you to rest Nola and Wheeler an extra day when you don't have a day off for a week because they've thrown so many innings these last few seasons. If he can be anything close to that, that's an additional added value. I don't even look at the cost of the contract, right? The contract is a sunk cost at this point. You've already invested it. There's nothing you can do about it. Whatever you get from him is just what you get. And if he can return anything close to what he did 2 years ago, that adds depth before Painter even arrives. And as you mentioned, Painter, I kind of, for us millennial fans, I hearken it to kind of, you might see Painter do what Pedro Martinez did in the 2009 season, right? They signed Martinez near the end of camp. He wasn't ready until about midway, and that kind of acted as, on top of the trade for Cliff Lee, acted as an additional trade deadline move that they didn't have to trade anything for, right? So Walker, you already have him. If he can be something to help you carry and help you get to that midway point when Painter is ready, and Painter lives up to what we think he can be in these early years, you've just like you said, the depth is so important. Look at how deep the Dodgers are. Look at what happened when people talked about how good the Phillies starting rotation was all of last season. And you saw what happened in those 4 and 5 holes when they had injuries and Walker was going through with what he went through. The depth is needed to survive the 162. The guys we mentioned might not even be on the roster, might not be looked to at all come October. But to survive and be in an advantageous position in October, you need depth, and that's exactly what they have right now in that rotation. Luzardo gives you anything close to what he did 2 years ago instead of last year. I mean, you're looking at a top 1 or 2 rotation in all of baseball, and anything that Painter or Walker gives you is gravy. But those guys can help you survive the grind that is the MLB season.
Yeah, all of a sudden, it really does feel like the Phillies have accumulated a wealth of pitching depth, especially on the starting side. Of course, signing Joe Ross, who is probably going to be more out of the bullpen, but he kind of seems to be a guy that's thrown a wrench into Taijuan Walker really finding a spot on this roster. And apparently, Joe Ross had an agreement with the Phillies before they had the Jesus Luzardo trade finalized. So I'm wondering how much kind of interchanged in that situation. But you have him. Tyler Phillips showed some moments last year that were interesting. You have, let's see what we can get out of Mick Abel. It's his last year to really show if he is or is not a prospect, if he can throw strikes in AAA. But there's more than just Taijuan Walker, Andrew Painter. There are pieces there. And it does feel odd how Taijuan Walker is going to fit into a bullpen, or I guess he would have to be in the bullpen unless Jesus Luzardo isn't going to start the season in the rotation. It's hard to say.
But, yeah, I don't think that's the plan. I think they want to It's a nice problem to have, right? You have guys, you
Yeah.
have 5, 6 guys who can start out of spring training, if forbid that they're all healthy, but you have 5, 6 guys who could potentially start depending on what Walker looks like, and what he looks like in spring training is going to determine what role he takes, right? Maybe he can be considered the long man, a la Spencer Turnbull last year, first guy in, and then Joe Ross can be more of a solid, how Tanner Banks was, right? Tanner Banks was never going to be called on to do mop up duty in an early blowout, but if you needed 2 innings out of a guy, he was the guy you were going to go to. I think that maybe Ross fills that role, and then Walker can be the guy who's always stretched out, who can be ready to step in at a moment's notice. Not that Ross can't do that, but that's just, that's something that they could do to keep both guys on the roster. And then maybe you send one of your other middle relievers down who has some options left. But the depth is key, right? You talk about surviving the 162, and you need depth regardless of where it comes from, bullpen or starting rotation, to do that.
Now, what do you think the odds are that, say, Taijuan Walker actually looks good in spring training, performs well? What if a team comes knocking at the door and says, hey, eat $10 million on the contract and we'll take it? Or even like $12 million. Just say it's like saving you $5 million on the contract. Do you just take it and run with that offer? What do we think is going to be the spring that we're looking at with Taijuan Walker here? Like, do we still think he might have a chance to be traded?
I do. Yeah. I think that, a lot of things happen in spring training. We had Painter himself. He was supposed to be in that rotation 2 years ago and suffers an arm injury, right? Pitching issues happen every single year. If you have a guy who's a viable veteran starter for a team who wants to make a push, we talked about the Marlins, and I joked a lot about the A's when the A's had to spend money and they give that huge contract to Severino. Like, hey, if you don't want a grievance filed, I got some money for you right here, right? But I think that it's possible, but it's going to depend on what he does, right? I don't think the club is in a rush to move him. I think that they brought him in for a reason. They like his attitude. They liked what he's done. It would be incredible to have that level of depth, right? If he were to return to a 4.2 ERA during the season, even if it's not out of spring training, that's a guy that if you keep him stretched out to be able to handle starts as opposed to coming in relief, that's a guy that could be, whether it's in spring training or early in the season, a team who wants to make a push, a team who wants to try and change the attitude. The Minnesota Twins come to mind, right? They're not great at developing pitching. They do have a couple guys there, but excuse me, they didn't sign any major pitchers in the free agent market. They need something if they want to continue to compete in that AL Central. Now that the Tigers have risen up, are they a team that could look to add some? Again, you mentioned eating a bunch of money from the Phillies, but any sort of relief, from the contract helps you when it comes time to make a move mid-season. So I think it's something that you would have to explore, right? I think the key is get him right and then let the chips fall where they may. They're not going to go into it with, we hope he gets right so we can trade him, right? But
and it seems they've really done all they can to push that he can get right. I know he was on like a throwing program, velocity program, something like that in the offseason. It seems like he's more around 92, 93 right now, at least from what I've heard. And of course, we saw last year he was sitting like 90, 91. And with his stuff, it just did not work. Like, he's not a guy that can live like that. And, it's going to be what it's going to be like in spring training. But of course, there are other storylines to watch in spring training. And one of them really is, what are the Phillies going to do with the catching position both this year and beyond? Now, it's a complicated situation in that it's odd that you have a incumbent backup catcher in Garrett Stubbs that probably isn't going to break the roster with the team, because it seems, I believe he has an option left, but then Rafael Marchan does not. And it's going to come down to whether Marchan can stay healthy, something that he hasn't really shown he can do this season or in prior seasons. it's going to come down to whether he can be a part of this team's future or not. And there's a lot of question marks to ask, and they need to be answered sooner than later.
For sure. He's a guy who at one point was one of the top prospects in the organization, right? They felt like he had a big future. You already touched on the health concerns. He seems to deal with a lot of injuries, whether it's major league or minor league level. It was surprising. It's very surprising to see the level of offense that he's been able to put forth at the major league level, considering that he is not necessarily known for having a great bat in the minor leagues, at least a power bat specifically. I think he had more home runs last year than he did in like 2 or 3 seasons in the minors. His slugging rate was significantly higher in the major leagues. But it's an interesting conversation, right? You know that JT Realmuto at one time was one of the best catchers in baseball, and maybe offense has taken a slight step back. But one of the reasons is that as you get older as a catcher, you need to be out from behind the plate a little more often, and they don't necessarily have a guy who can viably fill in for him an extra 20 games, right? If you're putting Garrett Stubbs out there, who was essentially worth less than a replacement level player last season, is he going to be able to do anything, or do you just accept that, hey, we can control the running game because he has a good arm, good pop time, but we're just going to have a black hole at the 9th
There's
spot
a
in the batting
reason
order.
why he was the vibes guy, he was the playlist guy, because he didn't really contribute much else. In 2022, he did. He actually had, I believe, a decent season when he was backing up for JT. Even earlier in that season, I remember JT Realmuto was really struggling, and Stubbs was actually performing well.
Yeah.
And there was not a conversation, but there was some outcry from some fans to be like, hey, let's get Stubbs some extra time behind the plate. And that's almost crazy to think of nowadays. But yeah, Rafael Marchan really does have a lot to prove. But if he can stay healthy, I think he's a viable option for the Phillies. He's shown some good things both with the bat and defensively as a member of the Phillies. Again, it comes down to that durability factor. And there is one guy that I kind of want to mention a little bit. In the Jesus Luzardo trade, the Phillies actually did acquire another player, Paul McIntosh. Now, I believe he's, a 26-year-old, 27-year-old. So he's definitely not a prospect, 27. But he's a catcher that has some pop in his bat a little bit. He's not terrible. He's played in AAA in 2023, played in AAA. In 2024 was more in AA. But he's a guy that's had around like a 700-800 OPS his entire major league or minor league career. And I'm wondering if that depth, and this is in case of emergency break glass kind of depth, but I want to see what he can do in spring training is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, he's an interesting piece. Who was it? I don't even know if he's still in the roster. They had a Ramos Garcia last year fill in a little bit.
Oh, remember how exciting he was in spring training?
Oh, yeah. So that's he's no longer in the organization. Okay, so he wouldn't be an option, but McIntosh is a great option. Again, just having depth at these positions is important, and it's going to come down to who rises to the top, right? I had the pleasure of speaking with Realmuto while he was hurt last year. Prior to a game on July 11th. Both backup catchers had been really hot, so I put together a little piece on how those guys had been performing. Excuse me. And JT specifically spoke about, he didn't go as in-depth on Stubbs, but mostly because people are aware of what Stubbs does, how involved he is with the pitching plans. And we really wanted to focus on this new guy that people might not know that much about if they're not as in tune with the minor leagues. One thing I loved that Realmuto said about Marchan at that time, he said, this is direct quote, he just shows that he cares. The first day he got here, he was already asking questions, asking me a lot of questions. He asked Stubbs a lot of questions. He talked to the starting pitchers and just tried to communicate immediately. That's the best way for a catcher to build a relationship with a pitcher, is to be able to communicate with them and ask questions and not be scared to be wrong sometimes. He showed right away that he was coming up here for them and to help those guys, not for his own ego. And to me, that's a lot of what you hear about Stubbs already, is that he's not an ego-driven guy, like maybe in the videos and being Mr. Fun guy on the bench. There's a little ego involved with that, but that's for everyone. That's not for him, right? So to hear that the other guy in this competition has a similar feel when it comes to the clubhouse and the pitchers and his role in all of that, I don't feel like a lot of people are worried, are you going to lose something by getting rid of Vibe Captain or whatever, the clubhouse DJ, right? But if you're worried about performance, this guy is going to be able to live up to what Stubbs has done as long as he stays healthy. Another thing to talk about, we're going to talk about these guys being rising to the occasion, right? If you want to prove that you belong over the other guy, well, both of them stepped up when JT was hurt last year. I think it was from the moment that JT went down, Stubbs recorded a hit in 10 of his next 11 games, and Marchan posted a 936 OPS during an 11-game period after JT hit the injured list. Combined, they hit 263 with a 434 OPS, 5 doubles, 4 homers. If you were to extrapolate that over the season, they would have performed better than Real Muto had at that point. Now, is that realistic for the entire season? Obviously not. That's why we're talking about backup catchers. It's not a competition for starter.
I am interested.
It's exciting to see that those guys have stepped up in the past.
Yeah, I am interested to see like what Marchan can do when given an opportunity. But one thing I do want to highlight, we have a good comment here that I want to show off, asking, make anything about the rumor that JT might play a bit of outfield this year. That's from Roddy Zod. I think that might be someone that you know.
It is, yeah. What's up, Alex?
But I think that's an interesting comment to bring up because it has been one of the early talking points of the spring. You know, what to make of this possible outfield move for Real Muto. I don't know how involved it really is. Now, could we, see him shagging some fly balls, working on some routes? Why not? He is an aging catcher, and anything to make him a little bit more flexible for a guy that really wants to play. Sure, why not? We heard this conversation last year with Edmundo Sosa, possibly getting reps in left field. I'd be fairly shocked to see JT Realmuto actually take the field this year in the outfield whatsoever in a regular season game. Maybe a spring game we would see him. But I feel like it's more of, well, let's figure something out to get you out from behind the backstop a little bit, to prolong your career, to make you a little bit more valuable of an asset, maybe towards a possible extension then. I think it's all a play towards what can Real Muto be in the Phillies' future, not just the primary catcher.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't it be cool if he could go out there and look better than Darren Ruff or Reese Hoskins or the
That's
failed
a low bar
minor league thing of Ryan
That's
Howard
a low bar.
That's like, I grew up with Pat Burrell playing left field every single day. I'm more than willing to accept the better athlete JT giving it a shot, right?
Yeah, and JT has more speed than any of those guys.
Yeah, so I think he's an athlete enough to do it.
Oh,
do
yeah.
I want him out there? That's a different question, right? It's not, the only way I would ever consider that. Obviously, it wouldn't be full time, but it would be, we need a bat or we need a pinch hit on a day where he had off. He goes into left field instead of taking over the catcher duty. And especially if your outfield options are struggling, right? You have 3 kind of up and down question marks out there right now in Rojas and Marsh and Kepler.
And we'll get more in depth with the
for
outfield.
Sure. But if that fails, maybe it's an experiment, right? But I don't even know if I want to see it in a spring training game, because if he goes out there and blows his knee out, we'll be cursing the high heavens that they ever thought of such a move, right? So it's an interesting idea, but when you get to be this high of a value player and this highly respected as a catcher, like so much of his value is what he does with the pitching staff. Do you lose value by putting him there? Now, I like what you said about the next contract. Maybe having position flexibility adds to the adds something to entice the Phillies to give him a longer contract. So from his perspective, maybe he wants to do it, but it sounds like he's pretty dead set on catching. But he did say he'll go out there and shag fly balls if it helps the team win. So
And what
I
I
wouldn't
heard
put a
from
lot of weight into it. But.
what I heard from other reporters is that he's not a huge fan of playing first base, even though he has played there in the past, although I think it's been 2 years at this point. But it seems like he does want to work with the team to try to extend his own career, but also do what's most beneficial for the team. But yeah, and then I think while we're talking about the future of the catching position and what's that going to look like for the Phillies, of course, one name that a lot of people have brought out is Eduardo Tait, who is really looking like a rock solid catching prospect for the Phillies. The only problem is he's 18 years old and he's only just sniffed a ball. He played 28 games for Clearwater last year, but he was solid. He hit 269 with a 777 OPS. He was way better in rookie ball than the Dominican Rookie Ball League.
Yeah.
But he's still super young, and even if he sniffs, let's say, Double-A this year, that's probably advancing him further than he's actually going to go. He's probably A-ball, and let's see if he can get to high A and succeed there. But if he somehow ended up at Double-A, okay, instead of 2028, maybe we're saying, oh, maybe 2027 this guy could be, but certainly not 2026. So yeah, I know you were kind of looking around at some external options, but I also want to hear your personal thoughts on Tait.
Yeah, I mean, Tait, it was nice to see him crack the top 100. He's to have a guy that young at a position that you know you're going to need in the next few years. That's always exciting. And I know that they used to be very high on their catching depth. To see that happen again, I think for a little while they weren't worried about trading catchers because they had JT. But now that they have almost an immediate need, especially if they don't extend him, it's nice to know that you have someone who's so highly regarded waiting in the wings. But he needs time to grow. He's 18 years old. The change from high school level ball or travel ball to minor leagues to major leagues, it gets so exponentially tougher to remain. A lot of catchers end up either moving positions because it's too tough on their knees, or they become defensive specialists because the pitching gets too hard, right? So we'll see how he develops. But as you mentioned, you hinted at 2028. That's where MLB.com, the top 100 prospects, that's their ETA for him to the major leagues is 2028. So like you said, best case scenario, he's a year early, but there's no guarantee that he's even here by 2028 or even with the organization at that time. So you need to start thinking more short term, And if that does not include JT Realmuto, well, you definitely don't want to go into next year with Garrett Stubbs and Rafael Marchan as your only option. So we did take a moment to look at some of the free agents, and it's not looking great there either.
Oh, it's pretty
bad. Best name outside of JT is probably Christian Vasquez. And I don't know how much money you're going to sink into him, but he's already making $10 million a season this year. What would that look like in a secondary contract at age 36? You might be able to save a little bit of money there. A decent bat, but as you get older, that's going to diminish too. So it would have to be a short-term deal with any of these guys. I don't know if there's anybody else that stuck out to you. The only other guy that really stuck out name-wise was Austin Hedges and Victor Caratini, but there's a few guys with options as well. Was there anybody on the list that stuck out to you if JT isn't a possibility for one reason or another?
There was one, but he's like the same age as JT, and it's not a sexy name whatsoever. It's Jacob Stallings. But he's a former Gold Glove winner. He did perform well with the bat last year with Colorado. In fact, he, I believe, hit a walk-off home run off of Jose Alvarado, if I remember correctly. That was painful. But if anyone, and we're talking like a stopgap and best case scenario, it's somebody to pair with Rafael Marchan. Because again, if Marchan performs well and shows that he can be on a roster for an entire season, maybe you go with a 50-50 split next year with someone instead of sinking extra money into JT. And I know that can be difficult with what JT contributes to the pitching staff, But who's to say Marchand can't work with a lot of these guys as well? But again, it's something that remains to be seen. But Stallings was the only one that I'm like, I'd kick the tires.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to that. I mean, obviously, I think the focus is, I don't know how you feel on them bringing back JT. I think, especially if it can be not a team friendly, but it's somewhere in the middle contract between maybe what he and his agent would ask for and what the Phillies would hope to pay him. He means a lot to this clubhouse. I wouldn't be opposed to bringing him back at all. But if it doesn't work out, you're going to have to pivot in, like you said, stopgap Jason Stallings for a few years, see how tight develops, see who else potentially emerges on free agency or the trade market. Maybe that's something that they could explore.
I think it's going to come down to, how does JT perform this year? Are we going to see a step back from any sort of power in his bat? Because if, his bat, take away his power, he's already an above average hitter. But if you take away the power out of his bat, I just don't see the value in bringing him back with like a 2-3 year deal, paying him, I don't know, what would you say, 12 to 15 mil a year? Obviously, he's not going to get close to the 23 that he was averaging,
right?
No,
I don't know if anyone's giving him that much.
But again, it's a thin market, a catcher. So who's to really say what the market's going to be at?
Yeah, that's the tough part, is that like you said, it's a pretty thin market. So if somebody wants the name recognition and wants to bring in a guy who's going to potentially evolve their pitching staff just by being who he is, he's someone who could be targeted for a decent payday. Another guy who he's under contract this year, but another guy who I'm surprised didn't get more attention at the deadline 2 years ago and then last year again. Elias Diaz is a guy who has an option for after this season, but he had a pretty good year with Colorado, a decent year last year, split between Colorado and San Diego as far as offense is concerned. I don't know how he grades out as a defender. I'll be perfectly honest about that.
I'm almost certain he's either middling or below average, because I don't think I've ever.
If you're looking at splitting time, he can be your offensive guy, and then you can bring in someone specifically for the defense as a stopgap for a couple years. So that might be something. Alex chimed in the chat that the Pirates have a gluttony of catchers that you might be able to snag in the trade market. I'd have to look into that, but yeah, I mean, it's something that if you're not making any progress with JT's agent during the season, if you don't have an opportunity during that window, you're going to have to pivot into other areas, because you cannot go into
former number one overall pick that the Pirates took, the catcher a few years ago.
I'm not sure.
I can't think of his name currently. I'd have to look at the Pirates roster from this past season, because I know he was up, but he went number one overall in the draft. I don't know if he still is a catcher even.
Let's look. You said a few years ago?
Yeah, Henry Davis. But he was bad last year, and he's been bad since he's been called up, really. If you want to take a waiver on a guy that used to be very highly acclaimed, again, number one overall, maybe you knock on the door of the Pirates and be like, hey, what you want?
Yeah, and again, especially if you're talking about stopgap, someone you're not going to have to invest a lot of money into, but you think you can get something out of him, either offensively or defensively, it's an option. But I don't want to spend too much time on the external options, because we have, one of the few battles that they have is
and also we're jumping ahead to 2026 when we're here to talk about 2025 spring training. And if you're good on moving on from catcher, I think we need to talk about the outfield.
The outfield is a big talking point. The experiment last year of hoping that Rojas would figure it out and that Marsh could be an everyday player, whether he was given a fair shot at facing lefties regularly, that's up for you to decide as an individual. The team felt like his approach and his results suffered compared to previous years. I looked it up. I know a lot of the talk was he given a fair shake against lefties? It seemed as though he had a similar percentage of at-bats versus lefties as opposed to righties the last 3 or 4 seasons. It's been almost identical percentage-wise. So it may not feel like it, but he's getting the same shake that he got in years prior, but it just wasn't working the same way this year. And that's another guy who you talk to him and you know how hard he works at it. So to see that not translate to results on the field has to be frustrating for him as the player, but obviously the franchise was hoping that they had the center fielder of the future when trading for him, and now you're looking at supplementing him with other pieces at this point.
Yeah, it is disappointing both on the Rojas and Marsh aspects. Marsh is a guy that before the season last year, I was saying, hey, why couldn't this guy take the next step and be an all-star this year? And honestly, when we saw in April, we were like, okay, maybe he did take the next step. Maybe this is a guy that's the new Jason Worth. I know that we always love comparing guys to old Phillies.
Of course.
But, Rojas is another one that I think to a lesser extent is a little bit of a disappointment. Of course, he was always sold as a glove first, speed first kind of guy. What do you think about what he did this winter? Because he did go to the Dominican Winter League and he did perform fairly well. In 30 games, he hit 295 with a 771 OPS, a 382 on base percentage. Someone pointed this out the other day. He had 12 walks in those 30 games. Would you like to guess how many walks he had all season last year?
I mean, if you're asking the question, it's got to be pretty close, right? I'm like 20.
He had 13 in the majors.
Oh man!
In 120 games. So I'd like to see. I did take a look at some of the rosters that he was a part of down there, and there were some names, some decent prospects, some like quad A guys. It seemed like the competition level was fairly decent down there. Obviously not major league caliber, but kind of right there. So I'm interested to see if he's taken a step. That's going to be difficult in spring training to see specifically, but I don't know how much stock you want to put into that. What do you think about his time in this offseason in the Dominican Winter League?
I'd say the accolades are one thing. When you dig into the numbers like you just showed, right? Is he attempting to improve his approach at the plate? He showed sign that he's working on that, right? They likely had a very specific game plan for him of what they wanted him to work on in the offseason. And it seems as though it showed, right? A big part of his skill set is his speed. His glove is number one. His speed is number two. If he can be a singles hitter and cause havoc on the base paths, bunts, walks, singles, that's all you need from a guy who's going to bat at the bottom of a star-studded lineup, right? We don't need a guy who's going to be swinging and missing all over the place. But if you want consistency, even if he's the 8 or 9 hitter, and he's showing a consistent approach to get on base more often, I'll take that all day, right? He doesn't need to hit 300 like he did in that 60-game sample of his rookie season 2 years ago. That was it was an outlier. I think it was a surprise to everybody. They knew that he could be a singles hitter, but it's more of he's the surprise guy. He's going to be an aggressive hitter, and pitchers, a lot of times pitchers will attack young players with fastballs because they're not ready for the change in fastball speed. But there's not that much of a difference in speed between the minors and majors nowadays, especially at the high levels of the minor leagues. So I think he was an aggressive hitter, and they weren't able to get fastballs past him when they started attacking him with more breaking pitches this season and getting him out in front and then finishing him with the fastball. You saw him go back down to earth a little bit. But if he gives you another 240 batting average this year, but the on base jumps from 280 to 320, that's a huge difference. And with his glove value alone and the fact that he'll be on base more often, I mean, you cannot complain about that. I try and think back in the day, right? Outside of the star shortstops, your Garcia Pars, your Jeters, your A-Rods, your Rollins, so many of the shortstops that we grew up watching, unless they were a household name, they were defense first. And center field was exactly the same way. Outside of Ken Griffey Jr., your power hitters were in your corners, and your center fielder was a defense first guy and will deal with what we get at the plate. We have enough studs in this lineup that Philadelphia has enough studs in their lineup where if they have a guy who's hitting 240 but stealing a few bases and putting up near Gold Glove caliber defense in center field, you are not going to complain about that. But it becomes magnified when he's swinging wildly, taking himself out of the bats, and everybody else isn't hitting. You feel like you need to make a move for the guy who's not the star, right? Do we split his time? Do we move him around? Do we bring him off the bench? He doesn't have the leeway of a Trey Turner yet, right? Trey struggles in the field. They're not going to look to put a defensive replacement out there. They gave him 11 years, $300 million for a reason. This guy is a minor league prospect that they hoped would show them something. Well, can he show them a small improvement? Then he'll stick around in the 8 or 9 hole for as long as he wants if he keeps giving them everything else. But you do need to see that steady improvement, and he showed a little bit of that in Dominican. Now, like you said, it's going to have to translate in spring training in the early going in the season for him to stick around on the roster. He's one of the few guys who they have flexibility with on this roster. So he's a guy who has something to prove still, despite his improvement in the Winter League.
So I think with the defense and speed, there's no question he'll be part of the roster, especially because he's cheap too.
For sure.
But he's a good guy you can always pull in late in a game in a couple different situations that can help you out. But I'm kind of worried he is really reminding me of Billy Hamilton at this point. It seems like he has the same level of speed, but better defense. But the problem is that these Phillies aren't the mid-2000s Cincinnati Reds. They can't really afford to wait and see with what Rojas can do. But that's what I'm kind of worried, because I'm looking at Billy Hamilton's career line. He hit 239 with a 292 on base percentage. And I'm kind of worried that's where Rojas is.
You're not putting him in Terrence Gore category yet?
Well, okay. Terrence Gore was a 4-time World Series winning, I don't even know, player.
He's a 3-time World Series winner. He has 16 career hits.
Yes. Listen.
He has
Rojas
2 career doubles, 3 career World Series.
Rojas will find a role with teams like that, because those are the kind of guys that are always valuable. I remember you were talking about defensive shortstops. I remember a guy by the name of John McDonald and the Phillies trading for him just to have an extra defense at shortstop. And I think that was like around 2012 or something, or not a good era. But I don't know. I want to see what he can do. I do have one guy in the outfield situation that I think I believe in more than anybody else. And I don't think you're going to think it's the exact name I'm going to go here. But Weston Wilson really showed me something last year, and he hammers lefties. You're talking about a lineup the Phillies have that is lefty heavy. Well, look no further than Weston Wilson as a guy who could be used as almost a utility guy, maybe sparingly at third base, but then in the outfield is more so. And you want to hear what he did against left-handed pitchers last year.
Tell the people. Tell them, Alec.
The people need to hear this, Kyle. The people need to hear this. Anyway, he hit 341 with a 1.025 OPS. He hammered
That's impressive.
lefties. Remember, this is a guy that hit for the cycle last year.
That was so exciting.
Doesn't happen on accident.
No.
This is a guy, before the Phillies called him up, I was kind of pointing out, hey, this guy has a 30-30 season in AAA. You know, he's got a little bit of speed. He's got some pop. Let's see what we can get out of him. And I don't know. This is a guy that just feels like the perfect role player that the Phillies need. And I think people are understating what he can contribute to this squad.
Yeah, I think that the messaging from the front office has been that they don't want to go platoon at a lot of positions because it leaves you with kind of a thinner bench by accident, right? If you not necessarily on paper because you're going to have the same amount of people, but if you have guys who are too specialized, they're doing one thing. But like you said, Wilson can play first, third if you really need it, second if you really need it, and the corner.
I think he's a decent second baseman too.
Yeah, better than he is at third, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But he's a guy who you can find a place for him if you need a bat late against a left-handed reliever, left-handed closer. And not that you want to default, because the plan is to start with the platoon in center field, and he's not a center fielder.
No.
And then to have Max Kepler as your everyday left fielder. But we'll
Yes,
see how that goes, right? Kepler has struggled a little bit against lefties recently. If he gets out to a slow start, Weston Wilson is a guy who's going to see a lot of at bats against left-handed starting pitchers because of exactly what you just said. I mean, even to go to his career numbers, right? You said it was his OPS is even higher if you look at the 2 years against lefties. His OPS, he's hitting 333 at the major league level in 60 plate appearances against left-handed pitching. Like, it's not a huge sample size, but the guy rakes against lefties. He walks against lefties. He's an effective player. And like you said, I think one of us wrote two years ago when he was potentially a September call-up, like identifying who we thought it might be. This is a guy you have to look at, 30-30 season, and that's what they did. And look at what he's done since coming up. He's really solidified himself. This kind of brings me into the only other major battle going on in spring training outside of maybe a bullpen spot is the last position on the bench. Weston Wilson is a guy who we just said is going to fit a very clear need. They're left-handed heavy, so they should be able to dominate right-handed pitching, but having that balance against left-handed starting pitching, you need some extra righties. So the question has been, do you want to bring up Cody Clemens, who's out of options, and leave him on the roster? Do you want to replace him with Weston Wilson and hope that Cody clears waivers and you can keep him in the organization? I think what Clemens has shown is that he's a guy who will get picked up. He's a major league level talent. He might not be a starter anywhere, but somebody's going to take him and put him on their bench to be an effective utility guy and spell their regulars. Do you take the risk and hope that he clears waivers to keep him, or do you start the year with Clemens up, Wilson down, and then because he has the flexibility, and just accept the fact that you're going to have to use roster flexibility, kind of similarly to what they did with Pache at the beginning of last season, right? Because Pache didn't have options. He and Rojas had similar numbers in spring. They left Rojas down because they had the flexibility to do so. And as we've talked about before, it doesn't just apply to pitching. Depth is important to get you to the end of the season. I'm going to pause there before I continue to ramble, but what are your thoughts on what they should do with that last bench spot, saying what we just said about Weston Wilson and his importance against left-handed pitching?
I'm going to say something unpopular.
Okay.
I'm not a fan of Cody Clemens.
Uh-oh. Hide your ears, Clemens family, please.
Oh, no. Not the Rocket.
The Rocket's going to come for you.
But I don't know. Watching this Phillies team late in the year last year, it seemed that Cody Clemens was given a lot of opportunity, a lot of leash to show what he can do heading into a playoff race, whether he can be a key contributor off the bench, what he can do with the bat. And it just seems that he shrunk when given that opportunity. Has he shown moments of clutch? Sure. He sees some opportunities in the past, but I'm more at a what have you done for me lately sense, and he has competition here. The Phillies brought in Christian Arroyo as a non-roster invitee,
Yep.
and I really do think he could be an option for late on the bench. I think he can play a couple of positions like second and outfield.
Yeah, he's seen time across the infield and in those corners.
So I don't know how much this Phillies team needs Cody Clemens. Again, he seems like a great guy, not dissing on him any way like that. It just, he feels like the odd man out. And it's not as obvious as past years. It really isn't. Like Christian Pache was a clear weakness, and he was a double of what Johan Rojas was basically at his best.
Yeah.
So it was a clear option to cut bait with Pache when needed to, when they added Austin Hayes. Now, with Cody Clemens, I just feel that there are players that do more for me in situations than him. I mean, you basically have two left fielders and a center fielder with Marsh and Rojas and Kepler. We haven't even talked about Kepler yet. And then, like I said, I think Wilson's the guy. I think he is much more of not an accomplished hitter, but having a potential of being an accomplished hitter than Cody Clemens has shown me. And
I think that's
defensively, I think
fair.
he's a more athletic, defender that could be, more depended upon to go out and play the field at multiple positions. That's where I'm at.
I think one thing that surprised me about Clemens is how much more effective he is against lefties than I think a lot of people realize. In his career, although it's limited exposure, no homers against left-handed pitching, but he's hitting 300 with a 783 OPS against lefties. Less positional flexibility, less athleticism than Wilson, but you're not if that trend continues, right? If his power side is his right-handed side, but he can still hit for a good average from the left, it almost doesn't matter what side of the plate he hits from. He can give you something that maybe another bench guy in Wilson can't. Now, looking at Wilson's looking at Wilson's splits, it's not a huge drop off. It's 333 versus lefties, 250 versus righties. You're not losing everything. It's not dropping into the 200s or below the Mendoza line, but you are getting kind of two sides of a coin with Cody that you might not get with Wilson. And because you do have the positional flexibility and you don't have a need because it's a minor league contract to promote some other guys to the major league level, they may start the year with Cody just to not lose him and potentially include him as an additional piece in a deal, or just to keep him away from a rival. Somebody's going to take that guy just because he's shown flashes, even if the result might be exactly what you said, right? That he doesn't last long term. I think enough people have seen him perform at the major league level in clutch moments that he would be somebody to consider. Now, on the flip side, he's going to be a guy coming off of the bench. Looking at his career numbers as a substitute, he's hitting below the Mendoza line at 185. So his career numbers are okay, but you're going to call on this guy to come off the bench more than not, and he has not shown that success outside of a few key clutch moments.
So you're saying he could be highly desirable by other clubs, correct?
Could be in theory.
So in theory, he could be attached to Taijuan Walker to eat more money.
And a prospect, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yep. There is a comment here I do want to highlight. So from Evan Comboy, we got, overall as a lineup and bench, do you think we can take a significant jump in contact hitting this year? And I think that is an interesting way to put it, especially mention contact hitting, not just hitting. Now, the Phillies do have some guys that can put the ball in play and, do some things. I think one aspect, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, Trey Turner, I really do feel is going to be the leadoff hitter. And I have a different spin to that situation than I've heard other people say. Last year, Trey Turner struggled against off-speed pitches and was not getting fastballs.
Yeah, they threw a lot of off-speed his way.
And what is going to be a better way for Trey Turner to get some fastballs, or to even sow some chaos at the beginning of a game for a starting pitcher, than have him lead off? Because then you are asking the opposing starting pitcher, all right, go ahead and pitch backwards to the first hitter in the game. I don't think a lot of starters are going to do that. They're going to at least get one or two fastballs in there. Maybe they flash one of their secondary pitches, but first hitter of the game, you usually don't break out the entire repertoire. Granted, leadoff means one time a game in that situation.
Yeah.
But I do think it's a comfortable situation to put Trey Turner in, especially if you want to get him more fastballs. And when we're talking about contact hitting, there's no one on this roster that is a better contact hitter than Trey Turner. This is a guy that can hit 300. I mean, I guess you can put Bryce Harper in that category as well, but they don't have a ton of guys like that. Now, looking at other guys on the roster that could take a jump in contact hitting, I think Bryson Stott is a guy that could have a rebound here and look a lot like he did in 2023. And I know, Kyle, you had some things that you wanted to talk about Bryson Stott with. So if you wanted to address what you think he could do, especially in terms of contact hitting this year, I'm all ears.
Well, yeah, I think that exactly what you said. The guy you need to see the biggest improvement contact hitting wise is Trey. I think that whether it's because you saw Schwarber get on a lot and Trey can slug, so he wanted to show that he could slug him in. I don't know what the mindset was, right? But a big thing that the coaching staff has talked about, and I've seen reporters talk about this since the start of camp, is they want to focus with Trey on using the whole field again, right? You use gap to gap, line to line, use your speed. And if he's somebody who can do that, you're going to see a lot of chaos on the base pass. You're going to see a lot of action. Another guy who comes to mind for a lot of people is Bryson Stott, for what he showed 2 seasons ago as a guy who battles, sees a lot of pitches. If you can start off a game with a lot of pitches, he's going to be the guy who comes up the most, so he can drive a starting pitcher's pitch count up. What does that look like? My topic kind of was going to be on the flip side, right? How long of a leash does Bryson Stott have if he doesn't show that he's starting to return to what he did 2 seasons ago and in 2022? Reason being is because we saw what Edmundo Sosa did last year in replace of Trey Turner. I think he was National League Player of the Week. At least he was one of the best National League hitters that month. It was early on in the season, but that month he's shown incredible numbers. He's a guy who is definitely a major league talent. He's a guy who could potentially be a starter. He's been a backup most of his career, but he's only he'll be it's his age 29 season this coming year. Is he a guy who could see an increase, especially against left-handed pitching, if Bryson Stott struggles? I don't want to see that, obviously. You hope for the best for these young prospects and these young players that they can figure it out. And Stott is a grinder, a guy who is a great bat-to-ball talent. He is a guy who I could see making a comeback and being closer to what we saw in 2023 in no time at all. But Alec, the point that I'm going to toss to you is, do you think that his leash is shorter this year? Do you think that they look to potentially move a Wilson or a Sosa into getting more at bats against left-handed pitching if he cannot hit lefties to start the year?
So I don't think Bryson Stott is on any real leash. I think they want to roll with him for the entire year. Of course, the storyline coming out for the winter was that he had some sort of elbow issue from, I believe, June onward last year, but he's feeling better with that. I don't think we're going to really need to get into that conversation, but there is one thing I want to say about Edmundo Sosa. This is something I've heard from Matt Gelb from The Athletic on his podcast. He was saying that one of the players the Phillies do get calls about for a potential trade is Edmundo Sosa. And that doesn't really surprise me because Sosa's best position really is a shortstop, and he's shown that he can handle himself, at least in short spurts. He might get overexposed otherwise. Now, I wouldn't be upset that if, Bryson Stott struggles, you need to put Sosa in at second for a little bit, but I don't think it's really something that's going to be something that happens. I think this is more of a what if there's not going to be a problem with Bryson Stott is what I'm saying. I really do believe in him in 2025.
Yeah, and I didn't really think that there was that they're going in with a game plan of that, right? But you look at the stark difference. Sosa hit 284 with an 861 OPS against left-handed pitching last season. Stott hit 226 with an OPS of, where is it? I lost the OPS, but it was 226 he hit against left-handed pitchers rather, just last season. A 595 OPS. So at what point does it, if he continues with that trend, right? The hope is that he's not, and I think they're going to let him play it out. But how far down the road do you do you let it go until you're like, look, he's hitting 220. We got to figure something out here. That they eventually did it with Brandon Marsh. Brandon Marsh was supposed to be the everyday left fielder, and the struggles got so bad against left-handers that they felt like they had to make a decision. Stott may have been one of your top prospects and the top prospect in the organization at one time. When do they feel like they need to make a move? Is it quick? Is it like if the record's bad, maybe we feel like we need to change something? Is it if his performance is bad? How much of a leash does he have? And what are the scenarios where you might start saying, hey, the organization might be concerned about this guy now?
So the only situations I think I could truly see them addressing, troubles against lefties specifically is maybe in some more important games, like say when they have to face the Dodgers, or if they're facing Sean Manaea on the Mets, or if they are against the Braves. I'm not sure if they have Chris Sale.
Yeah.
If Chris Sale is starting, maybe in those situations, maybe in the playoffs, maybe late in the game, they pinch hit for him with a Weston Wilson, which again, I would be fine with, obviously, as I have addressed. But again, I feel like they are giving him full reign at second base, and they really do believe in him. And I feel like anything else right now is going to be purely conjecture, and I think we have to have faith in Stott until he shows us, painfully otherwise. Specifically painfully.
Yeah, true. If you want to bring up the comment from Roddy Zod too, I agree. I think that
with Crawford.
No, I was thinking the one about Stott. We can pivot to Crawford in a moment, but
yeah, he was saying that
till June, right? I think you're at the earliest is when they would even think about potential. That's when the conversations would start. I think you're right that it's going to be free reign. He's our second baseman, no questions asked. At least the first 2, if not 3 months of the season, when you start getting into All-Star and trade deadline time.
I really don't think it would be until. I honestly don't think it would be addressed until August.
The only reason I say July is because you have a chance to make a trade before then. But
I think they have some internal options for a second baseman. Again, Sosa, Wilson, see what. I'm not going to say Miller. I'm not going to say. I almost said Miller, but I'm not going to say Miller.
Arroyo's, you have guys in there who can.
Yeah, there's some interesting options. But I did want to pull up this other comment about Justin Crawford. So Justin Crawford's name has been shuffled around prospect lists this offseason. Like weirdly so. Like some places he's like almost a top 50 prospect. Other he's bottom of like 100 prospect lists. But in some he's not even in the conversation for top 100 prospects. And it's been a little bit confusing to me because I'm someone who actually saw Justin Crawford play last year. Granted, I saw some of the criticisms of, him needing to lift the ball more, not relying on his speed, a lot of ground balls. I saw some of that. But then I saw a guy in Double-A Reading hit 333 with an 834 OPS. Is he working with his speed? Yes. But that's his strength. You can't just say to a guy, yeah, forget about your strength. We need you to lift the ball more. That's how you ruin players.
Yeah.
But at every level, this guy has hit, except for his first foray as an 18-year-old in 5 games at A-ball. So sue him on that one. But, A-ball in 2023, 344 hitter. High A in 2023, a 288 hitter. High A last year, a 301 hitter, and a Double-A last year, a 333 hitter. I mean, he's shown that he can hit. Is he ever going to develop power? Probably not. But does he need to? No. He just needs to, hit a few more line drives. A little bit more gap to gap. But that's about it. And I've seen good defense from this guy too. So I really do believe Justin Crawford could be a guy that the Phillies see get pulled up this year. Because
similarly to how Rojas did 2 years ago, right? I mean, I could see it being if he just keeps skyrocketing and he's hitting over 300 at every level. You need a defensive guy. Someone gets hurt, or he's just red hot. They have some question marks out there. It's not out of the realm of possibility. I would put the odds at pretty low of us seeing him with regular time.
Oh yeah,
on the
with
major
regular
league
time,
roster, but
yeah. But I think he has less question marks than Rojas did at this juncture of his career. I think Rojas was always canned with an asterisk of, yeah, but is he really going to hit? Like,
he's defense
it
first
was
guy.
a question I submitted to Mayo of MLB.com on Blue Sky, asked, is the bat real? And he's like, yeah, I think the bat is real. And that's one of the foremost prospect guys in baseball. What do you remember Mayo's first name?
No, I do not.
No, but a good prospect writer for MLB.com. Last name is Mayo. Anyway, but he really did believe in Crawford's bat. So I think he's a higher ceiling Johan Rojas.
For sure, but I would like to give him a chance to develop a little bit more.
Yes.
It seems like they may have skipped some development with Rojas, and he's learning on the job.
He got promoted right from Double-A.
Yeah. Excuse me. Time check real quick, guys. You're listening to Alley Talk here on Philly Sports Network's YouTube channel. You can catch us on Twitter at Philadelphia SN, Blue Sky at Philly Sportsnet Blue Sky whatever all their extra stuff at the end that Blue Sky requires.
Yeah.
You can catch me on Twitter at Kyle Fisher45. Alec, if you want to drop your Twitter handle.
Yeah, I'm Costable on base. You can find me Viceroy Alec Costable. But on Blue Sky, I believe I'm Baseball Alec. But if you search my name, you'll find me that way as well. On both platforms. But yeah, we're a little over an hour now. But I think there's still a few more things.
For sure. Yeah, just wanted to do a reset. Definitely give us a follow. And if you go to Philly Sports Network or at Philadelphia SN, you can find the entire Phillies team's content throughout the season. Make sure to give us a follow and check in with the content all season long. We'll also be doing regularly scheduled streams. We haven't decided on the exact date, so stay tuned for that info. But if you aren't just a Phillies fan, if you're 4 for 4, we have great writers, great content across the board. So make sure you're checking out Philly Sports Network.
And I'm going to bring up your friend Alex again here. He's bringing up, we went from one prospect, let's go to another. He's saying, Aiden Miller, has he gained any of his power back from having the broken hamate bone? The hamate bone was what allowed Miller to drop to the Phillies of the draft. I believe he was drafted 19th overall a couple years back. And it was that broken hamate bone that allowed him to fall. And he's rebounded just fine. Let me look up his power stats, but from what I've seen, he has done very well. There was a brief period where he struggled upon promotion to, I believe it was high A last year, but he rebounded and hit 258 there. He only put up 11 home runs last year, but that's in 102 games. I don't think we need to be worried about this guy trying to hit 30 home runs, but I think it's a guy that could definitely hit, 20 home runs in his future. But yeah, he played just 5 games in Reading last year, so we'll ignore that stat line. I think he did face an injury late in the season in Reading. So, but there's no reason not to be excited about Aiden Miller. Is he going to have huge power? I don't think he'll have huge power. Could he have average power? Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I think a lot of guys are hitting 15 to 25 in that range nowadays. I think you could probably see him getting back there, no problem. I mean, that once that injury is healed, he should be back to normal. I mean, a lot of guys
the hamate bone injury specifically is healed. I wasn't sure what he was dealing with in Reading though. But I'm sure he's all better with that.
And I mean that
the invite to spring training, and we'll see him in spring training action.
Yeah, and the organization is still very high on him. He's already moved kind of quickly through the organization's through the system. Dombrowski was quoted on the first day of camp saying, "We think he's a very good player. Might come and it might come to him very quickly. So we want him to have that exposure in big league camp as the reason that he got the invite to big league camp this year. So clearly he said that our people think he can handle, it's Dombrowski again, our people think he can handle it from a player development standpoint, and he has a great makeup, so he won't be intimidated. Sticking at shortstop for now. I know some people talked about him potentially moving off of the position, but if you can get value at that position offensively, you're gonna keep someone there as long as you can and continue to develop them in that field. So great question, Alex. I think that's a guy that to keep an eye on. I don't think he makes an impact this season, but I think he's going to start to get some of that pop back as he gets healthy for sure.
And then I think we can go right into one of the hottest topics, and everybody wants to know, what's the Phillies lineup going to look like this year?
Here we go. Lineup predictions, baby. I told you I wanted to do this. You said I was crazy, and then we listed it as the topic anyway. It's one of the hottest topics when you don't have a season of a lot of new incoming guys or a lot of questionable roles outside of, if there's any injuries, you're basically talking about a sixth starter, a middle reliever, and a last guy on the bench as your only competitions coming into the year. You got to find something to talk about. And what gets the juices flowing more than changing up the lineup for the 95-win NL East champion Philadelphia Phillies? But it's been a conversation ever since they brought in their leadoff hitter from the last few seasons, Kyle Schwarber. Is he a guy who can reliably be a leadoff? And the answer has been yes. It might not be, it might not be what you traditionally receive or traditionally think of as a leadoff hitter, but in today's game, it is something that you need, somebody who can get on base consistently for your big hitters behind them. But something has to give, right? If they keep falling one round shorter, well, this year they would be out in the wild card round or not make the playoffs at all. So that something has to give, getting yourselves over that proverbial hump. In one place you can look to potentially generate more consistency is switching that lineup around. So we touched on it early on, Alec, but I think that there's an easy move to make, and that would be taking one Trey Turner who's batted there in the past, who has the speed, who has enough pop where he can give you something similar to what Schwarber has out of a doubles or home run pop out of the leadoff spot to start a game, while also being able to get on base maybe more consistently by driving the ball to all fields. And that's a guy that I think would be the easy fill in at leadoff. So we can go from there. I think that the club likes to have their lefties righties split up. So you would probably see Bryce Harper move to 2. You'd have to find one of the righties to be 3, and then Schwarber falling into that cleanup spot. We'll start there, though. What are your thoughts about the top of the rotation? Who do you want to see where? And I know we teased Trey, but where do you see him falling in the line?
Trey's easily the leadoff hitter. I think Rob Thompson has basically said it's going to start the season with Turner at the leadoff spot, but I disagree with you about splitting up the lefties.
Okay.
I believe that the optimized Phillies lineup is going to be at the top: Turner, Harper, Schwarber, Bohm. And here's my reasoning behind it. Bryce Harper needs someone to give him protection behind him. It needs to be the Phillies' second best hitter in Kyle Schwarber. And I don't think that's an argument, really, that Schwarber is their second best hitter. He's a pure slugger that gets on base. But last year, he showed something different. He showed that he could hit lefties. And if he can hit lefties, what's the problem with keeping him right next to Harper there? Because you could basically ambush a lefty, because maybe another manager mistakenly says, well, we got a pocket of 2 tough left-handed hitters here. Let's bring in a lefty to get these 2. We'll worry about the third out. But then you run into a buzzsaw of newly good lefty hitting Schwarber, Alec Bohm behind him, and in my opinion, probably going to be Nick Castellanos behind him. Yeah, I'm stacking 2 lefties and 2 righties. I know. It's crazy. It's unheard of. Never been done before. But I'm getting too deep into the lineup, not to give you your fair share here. That's my opinion as to why Schwarber needs to hit 3 behind Harper. because it's going to protect Harper and give him better pitches to hit, especially if you want Trey Turner doing things while he's on first base and using his speed, because he's not going to be able to utilize his speed with Harper right behind him all the time, because that's going to welcome a intentional walk sometimes, especially, with 2 outs, unless Schwarber's the guy right behind him.
Oh, yeah. And like you said, if it's a strong right-handed pitcher, are you going to intentionally walk Bryce Harper to get to Kyle Schwarber, who destroys you as well? I don't know. More than likely not, right? That would be, unless you think he's going to be more susceptible to a strikeout, depending on who the pitcher is. I think that it's important to remember, Phillies fans, and some of you who may be younger might not remember how dominant the middle of this lineup was, but the 2008 World Series winning champions had 2 lefties batting back-to-back 3 and 4 in the order, in Chase Utley and Ryan Howard. So it's not like it's never been done before that you have people stacked behind each other. I think that it's more the messaging from the fans, from the organization than it is the fans themselves, right? I think the fans are not opposed to the idea of stacking 2 lefties and 2 righties if it makes sense, as opposed to separating them. But it seems to be an important part of Thompson's lineup construction. So although I agree with you that would be a great move, I think that having Schwarber 3 behind Harper, or even if you want to keep the on base in front of him and keep Harper where he is and just flop Trey and Kyle, maybe that could be something. But I'm going to put my projection out there as keeping in mind what Rob Thompson is more than likely to do. So if we're assuming that Trey Turner bumps up to 1, I think that Bryce Harper is the perfect 2-hole hitter. He is not only great at taking walks, great at being patient, great at driving up pitch counts, but he's one of the best hitters in all of baseball when he's on, right? When they signed him, I envisioned him as a 2-hole hitter. Now, with the roster, it made sense for him to be 3, especially if you think in traditional terms. But look at how many guys have hit 2 recently who have similar skill sets, right? Judge hit 2 for a long time. Ohtani was 2 until Mookie went down for a little bit, and then he got bumped up. But now Mookie Betts, all-time leadoff hitter, is hitting 2. Trey Turner hit 2 for both Washington and here, and at one point was up there for the Dodgers. Bryce Harper, when he was in Washington, hit 2. It's because of the on base and these guys' ability and willingness to take walks on top of their overall hitting prowess, the 2-hole has sort of morphed into that position where you put your best overall hitter. So for me, it's Trey Turner, number 1, get on base as long as he can use gap to gap, line to line. You put Bryce Harper right behind him, another guy who can get on base at a high rate and can drive in, Trey Turner. And then you protect him with either my personal preference would be Alec Bohm. We know what he did with runners in scoring positions last year. Maybe dropped off in the second half, but I know early in the season he was hitting well over 350 with runners in scoring position, was one of the best in the league with runners in scoring position. So if you get Trey hitting his way on, Harper being patient and taking a walk, you let Alec Bohm do what he does, and he proves to you once again why he's one of the better hitters in the lineup. And then you have there more of a traditional sense, but you have Kyle Schwarber there to clean it up. Now, if Schwarber has that same mindset that he had at the leadoff hole, which is difficult to do, but you hope that he can continue to be patient and have a great eye and draw walks at a high rate, it extends your lineup that way, right? Your 4-hole hitter being JT or Nick or Alec previously, those 3 guys are more free swingers, not guys who are going to look to draw a walk. Kyle will accept that, yeah, okay, if runners are on, you might not want to pitch to me, but guess what? I'm just going to put another guy on for whoever's up next. So I think that extends your lineup by having a guy so willing to just pass the baton and next guy up mentality. And whether it's because of off-season tragedies or because he's in revenge mode or because he shaved his head and he's trying to channel some Nick Sirianni energy, Nick Castellanos is a guy who I think is going to be on a revenge tour this year. And I think having him batting 5 behind Schwarber, you're frustrated because you just walked Kyle Schwarber to put a second guy on with 1 out. You want to groove a heater to try and get ahead of the next guy. And Nick Castellanos is swinging hard and often at those first 2 pitches. I think it just adds some some depth to the lineup as opposed to kind of running into that middle where you had Bohm, Castellanos, JT all in the 4 to 7 range and all being free swingers, right? If you move a free swinger in front of a guy who's more likely to attempt to draw a walk, it adds some more depth to that lineup, causing you to. Now, obviously, offense wasn't a problem all season for them, but when they lost it, they lost it. And I think splitting up your free swingers and your guys who have higher on base percentages will help them extend. So I know we've gone a little bit off, and we only had a shot at the first 4, but I'm going to keep going. I would have Schwarber 4, Castellanos 5. And then from there, it's going to depend who's hitting, right? Against the righty, maybe if it's a right-handed starter, maybe I have Brandon Marsh hitting there. You're more than likely going to see Bryson Stott hitting there to start the season, but Brandon Marsh slugged and destroyed right-handed pitching last season. So maybe you have slight differences in the lineup. The top 4 or 5 stay the same regardless of handed of pitcher, and then you see Brandon Marsh in the 6 hole against right-handers, Bryson Stott in the 6 hole against left-handers. Filling it out with JT, Kepler, and then insert whoever else is left, whether it's Rojas or Stott against the lefty. So I think that it adds a lot of length. And then if you do see a resurgence from Max Kepler, if you do see a resurgence from Bryson Stott against left-handed pitchers, it helps you turn that lineup over and give more opportunities to the guys at the top who we know can slug when they need to, right? I think that with runners in scoring position, leadoff hitters saw a significant higher percentage than 3-hole hitters did. So Trey, while his focus should be getting on in front of the guys in front of him, he's not going to lack in RBI opportunities either, especially if those guys can turn it around a little bit and see what they do towards the end of that lineup, especially against lefties. So Alec, I don't know how you feel about my projection for the rest of it, but what do you got after that 4-hole?
Sorry, lost you for a second. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. I would say Alec Bohm is the guy that I'd want to see at cleanup again. I think the hand thing at the end of the year really did hurt him, and his perception of what his season really was really cost him, like the last 3 weeks or so. But he's a guy that even career-wise, you look at his numbers with runners in scoring position, this is a guy that locks in. And if you have him immediately after a Harper and a Schwarber, 2 guys that could take a walk, I feel like he's a guy that could really, really break things open as a cleanup hitter for the Phillies. I do agree that the most likely scenario probably is Turner, Harper, Bohm, Schwarber, and I don't think that's terrible either. I just feel like Schwarber gives Harper more protection than Bohm does.
Yeah.
And again, that gives Trey Turner a little bit more free reign on the bases compared to, if Bohm is there at 3. So I think that's probably what's going to happen philosophy-wise. But for me, I'd want Bohm 4. I think I'd double up with Castellanos 5. I don't think you can have him hit lower than 5. I think it'd be weird. I guess that means you would have to put either Kepler is a left-handed hitter, right? No.
Yeah, he's left-handed hitter.
Yeah,
hit lefties well a few years back, but dealing with injuries the last 2 years, not performing as well.
I guess I would put him 6 to start the season over Stott for now, just because I feel like Kepler's a guy that has more pop in his bat, or at least should. We're going to have to see what he can do in spring training and what kind of player he really is at this stage of his career. Then I'd probably put JT, Stott, Marsh at the bottom of the lineup, Marsh, Rojas, whoever. I think that's how I'm kind of rounding things up. I'm not forgetting about anybody, am I?
No. I mean, Rojas versus Marsh, but
yeah,
same concept, regardless, right?
But I think that's how I would kind of round things up there. It would be great if Marsh in that lower pressure situation batting 9. It'd be nice if he could take a little bit of a step forward offensively, because it is always nice if you can have the luxury of doing it, have a decent bat in that 9 hole, especially when the top of your order is that good. To have later in the game, that 9 hole hitter be on for the leadoff guy, the 2-hole, the 3-hole, whatever the situation is. But I think that's where I'm pretty much at with the roster, following that left-right pattern down the lineup. But towards the middle, I'm fine with stacking those lefties and righties if Topper is. And I think it really is going to come down to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could see different approaches, lefty versus righty. Like I said, I like batting Marsh a little higher just because he slugged well against right-handed pitching. But against lefties, I would love to see him bat low, get more at bats against lefties, and take the pressure off. If he's hitting 8th or 9th, I'd be fine with that. I think you're going to see Rojas in the order more often, at least to start the year against left-handed pitching. But just to get back to what you were saying about what both of us said about Alec Bohm, really. Men on last season, he OPS of 868 with runners in scoring position and OPS of 906. The guy knows how to hit with runners in scoring position. So whether it's hitting 3 or hitting 4, the guy he seems to focus when the pressure's on there, which is a great tool to have in the middle of the lineup. It doesn't matter what his numbers look like in the second half; he still performed extremely well with runners in scoring position. I know we're almost at time, Alec. We're going to wrap up shortly in about 5 minutes here. One thing I wanted to mention, and I'm going to retweet this again, but Ryan Spader, MLB analyst, author, guy from Philly, does a lot of deep dives on statistics. He sent out a tweet in the offseason that I loved. It was about why the best hitter in your lineup should bat first. During the entire game, batting first, you saw almost 10% more plate appearances with the ability to tie the game or take the lead across the majors than batting third. From the 7th inning on, because you might think, oh yeah, of course, they hit first. They're always up more often. They have a chance to take the lead right off the bat. Well, after the 7th inning, when your position in the lineup, quote unquote, doesn't matter anymore, it's darn near 10% again. After the first inning, it's 13% more likely in 2024 for the leadoff hitter to have a chance to tie or take the lead than the 3-hole hitter. And from the 9th inning forward, it's a 13.41% chance that the leadoff hitter will have a chance, opposed to the 3-hole hitter, to take the lead or tie the game for his team. So having a guy who can slug there, whether it's Schwarber, whether it's Harper, whether it's Turner. Now Harper's off the board. He basically said he doesn't want to lead off. One of those guys who can slug is going to have an opportunity for RBI. So if your concern is, oh, he wants to get his numbers up, that's not going to be a worry. It's happened. It's a trend for year after year that you have the opportunities to change the game from the 1-hole hitter more often than you do as the 3-hole hitter. And obviously that number, I don't have the percentages because he didn't send that out. But your number would increase in the 2-hole as well, naturally, right? So Bryce moving up will only give him more opportunities to drive runs in, and then Schwarber can drive those guys in behind him, right? So I think that while it's like, why change something that's working, there are numbers and evidence that would point towards maybe making a lineup shakeup and having somebody who is less of a all or nothing type of hitter at the top can really get your offense going.
Yeah, I believe the statistics are like with every spot you move up to the lineup, it's like 16 plate appearances a season on average. So like with Harper moving up a spot, assumedly he's going to see an extra 16 plate appearances. Turner is going to see an extra 16 plate appearances. If Bohm goes up, he'll see an extra 16 plate appearances. So I believe that's where that's at. I do follow that philosophy of getting one of your better hitters in leadoff. I do like a guy that can have some speed, but I don't think it's completely necessary as it used to be in the past when you were dealing with, especially earlier in MLB's past when fielders were nothing like they are today. The first ever shortstop to have like a 990 fielding percentage in a season, I believe, was 1970. So it took that long. So you wanted guys with speed because the philosophy of you put the ball in play, something good can happen, only increases with speed. So yeah, no, in today's game, I do see the value of having a guy that can really hit the ball up there. But I also see you might want to have them in a 3-hole, in a 4-hole, especially some guys that can hit a long ball, because a 3-run home run is hard to come back from.
Yeah.
A solo shot, it's 1 run. And that's part of the reason why there's been so much of a call for Kyle Schwarber to move in the lineup. And I think they're going to play around with that to just change things, not out of a necessity kind of thing. But, you know, I see where the argument is, and definitely I think we'll see more of the multi-run home runs that people are clamoring for.
Definitely, I definitely think that opens them up to having, Schwarber's home runs having more of an impact, batting lower in the lineup. And when you have 3 guys who can slug like that at the top, it's only that statistic matters a little less when you have a guy who can slug like Trey, a guy who can slug like Harper, a guy who's killer with runners in scoring position in Bohm, and then it really does add to the lineup to have those guys bat a little bit lower. And like you said, coming back from 3 versus 1 is a big difference. I know we're getting right at time. I think it's about time we get out of here. Let's plug ourselves before we hit the road. Alec, where can everybody find you during the season for your wonderful Phillies content?
I'll be around Philly Sports Network / the Metro Philly, hoping to be able to cover a bunch of Phillies games this year. Located and based in Reading, so hopefully I'll be covering some of the guys there as well, and keep you covered on who's coming up through the ranks for the Phillies. Yep, you can find me on Twitter or Blue Sky. Not calling it X, you can't make me. But yep, like I said, just search my name, Alec Costable. You'll find my stuff that way. Do have a baseball encyclopedia both of us have worked on.
Yes, sir. Over the summer.
Should be coming out over the summer. So once that's going to come out, I'm sure you'll see both of us prop that up a little bit. Kyle,
definitely.
You tell the people where can they find you? Where can they support you?
Of course, you can find me on Philly Sports Network. Make sure you follow all the great writers that we have over there. They're covering all 5 major teams in the city. We even get an occasional MMA and some college looks. So make sure you follow everybody over there. Great stuff going on with the Sixers and Flyers now that Eagles season is over. If you want to still bask in that glory, we have great Eagles writers. But at Philadelphia SN on X or Twitter. To find myself at Kyle Fisher 45 on most socials, on Blue Sky at kylefisher45.bsky.social, on Twitter at kylefisher45, YouTube at Kyle Fisher Media. But make sure you follow those Philly Sports Networks channels. That's where you're going to find all of our content and as well as the great content from the rest of our team. Alec, this was a great kickoff for me. I'm ready to sit down this weekend, watching spring training closely. We'll start seeing some of these great guys getting some love early in the season. We're going to see Marchand behind the plate to start that first game. And you know that we'll be tweeting along all season long. So give us a follow on social. Make sure you check us out and stay tuned to the YouTube channel for the next Alley Talk stream.
Absolutely. And everybody, tomorrow, Philly's first spring training game. Nabil Crismont will be the starter. He's a non-roster invitee. It will not be on TV, but I believe there'll be a radio broadcast. Go out and absorb some Phillies. If you're lucky enough to be down in Florida, go take in all the sights. Go help out all the local communities down there that were hit hardest by the hurricanes. Go support all those local businesses. And let us hear from you. Don't be a stranger on the socials. Feel free to ask us any questions. Let us know what's going on down there in spring training if you happen to be down there. And yeah, from myself, Alec Cosville, from Kyle Fisher, this was Alley Talk.